Michael O'Donoghue to completely distance himself from the film, calling it, quote, a piece of unadulterated, unmitigated shit, end quote.
I can't wait to get into that quote later on. The full quote is bonkers.
Originally, the production wanted John Williams to score the film. However, the film's score slot went to Danny Elfman.
It's a good score, too. The Elfman score is great.
Yeah. Tell him that, I guess. He was, who has expressed disappointment in the past that most of what he had worked on for the film was too dark and didn't really fit within the finished product. Paramount were very nervous about the film and wanted to have a solid hit on their hands, which led to the hire of editor Frederick and William Steenkamp, who made sure to create a family-friendly movie that was both fun and coherent, as they had shot, I guess, a shit ton of material. On November 23rd, 1988, the film is finally released and becomes a smash hit, opening at number 1 and eventually grossing $100 million globally. Although critics didn't love the film upon its release, with many saying the overall tone was too mean-spirited, however, through the years it's become a popular choice as an alternative to your more traditional Christmas films, with the cast and the director even praising the film for its themes to this day. If you have yet to see the film, you can stream it now through AMC or Pluto TV. So now that we're through what I had to say, I want to know, like, what made you choose? Obviously, you have a strong connection with this film, and you love Bill Murray. I think everybody that's familiar with the show knows that.
Yeah.
But why did you pick this one, especially for the?
Well, I picked this one for the Christmas show, obviously, for the obvious reason. But you and I, this is the 4th year that we're doing this, and the first 3 years we kind of went a little untraditional with our Christmas movie picks. But this year I said, hey, you know what, I think I want to cover more of a traditional Christmas movie for a change.
Okay.
One that I still love, but also, as you had in your write-up, one that's a bit more cynical and harder edged than not the typical feel-good Christmas movie, at least, the first half to 3/4 of this movie. So it's a movie that, like I said, I've been watching since I was young because I saw it when it came out. Really enjoyed it then because I love Bill Murray, still do. And it's like you said in your write-up, it's kind of a cult classic now for kind of a good alternate Christmas movie from what the usual Hallmark and Lifetime channel fare is always.
It feels very like subculture.
Yeah.
And I dig that about it for sure.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with a good title for the show that worked in like some kind of cynical line, and I couldn't do it in the time allotted. Because I don't know if your listeners know this, but the title is always like the last thing I think about.
Yeah,
it was gonna go like right over my head until you had texted me earlier today and said, "What about the title?" And I was trying to think about something because it's very cynical in the beginning, especially the first act is great. So I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited to get into a lot of the research that you and I turned up about the kind of fraught production that it had. And it's a good way to end, kind of, because we still have next week's episode, but it's a good way to end the year covering a director that was very prolific that we're going to talk about in a moment, because he just passed away earlier this year. So it's kind of a good double act here that we're going to pull. Well, let's start off. Let's talk about Richard Donner, the director of this movie. Because looking at his filmography, you'll get whiplash. He had so many movies of different genres and kind of made his mark with each of those movies in that genre. Like, we've talked about the Omen before. I think I wrecked it on our Halloween episode, which was his first film, his first studio film. And that's amazing. That's a landmark horror film.
Yes.
I mean, he's a director that came out of TV. So he directed a lot of real famous shows before this. Let me look at my notes here. I know he did Gilligan's Island, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, Perry Mason, Kojak. It's going to get wrecked next week, as is tradition. But Richard Donner also directed a handful of episodes for The Twilight Zone, one of my all-time favorite TV shows, including, like, one of the most famous episodes, which is Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, with William Shatner on the plane, and he sees, like, the demon. He sees the gremlin, basically, outside. If you haven't seen the Twilight Zone movie, watch that segment, because they remade it for the Twilight Zone movie. George Miller directed it, and that segment is one of two that actually redeem the movie, because the other two are trash. And fuck John Landis while we're at it. But watch the George Miller remake of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet in the Twilight Zone movie if you can, because it's so fucking good. But the original episode, which is fantastic, even if it's just a guy in a gorilla suit, basically, was directed by Richard Donner. Unfortunately, some of the other episodes he directed for the show aren't great, and that's not his fault. That's just he came in late to that show, and that last season is not very good. The writing is all over the place, and a lot of those episodes are garbage, for lack of a better word. I don't like it. Rod Serling did not do the majority of the writing on that last season. So a lot of the Richard Donner directed episodes came in that final season. So I can't recommend those, but I will say seek out Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. I wish I remembered what season that was in. I think it's the third or fourth. No, I think it's the third, because the fourth was an outlier season. There were hour-long episodes, so it's not the fourth season. I believe it's the third. Possibly the fifth. I'm all over the place tonight. It's either the third or the fifth season. Seek it out. But then he, after making some TV movies, then he jumps into film. Starts off with The Omen. Huge hit. Great movie. And then his follow-up to The Omen is a landmark superhero movie with Superman. He directs Superman. And actually was set up to direct the second and got about halfway in, and then ended up getting fired off of that and replaced. But he still has this kind of cult reputation with what happened to him on the second Superman, and I think that there is a Richard Donner cut of the movie that you can seek out. But he does these two movies. Huge. He had a good working relationship with Warner Brothers. Most of his movies, I think, got set up at Warner Brothers. After that, he does Lady Hawk, which I think I wanted you to mention at one point in time, probably when Rutger Hauer had died, which is a really underrated fantasy movie from the 80s. Rutger Hauer, Michelle Pfeiffer, Matthew Broderick, kind of a medieval. Very good movie. And then he makes one of the most famous kind of kid adventure movies with The Goonies. So he has all this. His follow-up to The Goonies is one of like the all-time action classics, another kind of secret Christmas movie, Lethal Weapon. And Donner, in fact, directed all 4 Lethal Weapons, skipped the 4th one, it's utter trash. It's super racist. Shouldn't be surprised with Mel Gibson, but Donner should have said no to directing that 4th one. It's bad. But then he goes on and makes his 90s are a little all over the place, and then basically in the 2000s he was non-existent. But he does. What's he do? We mentioned Assassins the last time we were talking about Assassins. He does that. He does Maverick, which is a pretty funny movie, despite Mel Gibson's presence in it. Conspiracy Theory, which is another decent flick. And then the 2000s, he makes Timeline, which is a bad movie.
With Paul Walker?
Paul Walker, and I think Gerard Butler's in it. I think it's a Michael Crichton movie. And Michael Crichton movies are never very good. He needed Steven Spielberg to make a good version of his novel. And then his last theatrical movie, if I'm not mistaken, is 16 Blocks with Bruce Willis and Mos Def, and that's a pretty solid thriller. And then he just kind of not necessarily fades away, but doesn't direct anymore, doesn't direct movies anymore. It should also be pointed out that he, along with Robert Zemeckis and I think Walter Hill, are the three guys that got Tales from the Crypt set up at HBO.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, I know Zemeckis definitely did, but I believe Donner as well. They all directed a handful of episodes for the series.
That's true.
I know Zemeckis has 2 or 3 pretty famous ones, and I'm sure Walter Hill had directed some of those episodes. So just an insane, and all over the place, touching on different genres. Just what a prolific director, and like I said, Omen, landmark horror film. Superman, landmark superhero film. Lethal Weapon, a real famous action movie that kind of a lot of other action movies got made because of that. The Goonies is a good movie. Very good movie. And then he makes Scrooged. In between Lethal Weapon films, the first and the second movie, Scrooge was in between those two. My opinion, a good holiday comedy with a great performance from Bill Murray. And it kind of bums me out to know that they just did not get along on set.
Well, I think there was just a lot of stuff going on, especially with, for whatever reason, Donner felt like he wasn't sure he was the right director for it.
And maybe he wasn't, coming off of a big action movie.
But the only thing is that I feel like, at least I've always considered Lethal Weapon to be somewhat of a comedy. So him saying
there's a lot of comedic elements to it.
Because he would say, I don't know how I feel about trying to do a comedy, but it's like, look at the Goonies. Look at, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's lots of funny stuff in those films.
So I thought that was interesting, that he doubted himself that way. And, I think Scrooged it's a good film. It's one that I haven't seen, definitely not as much as you.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoy it, and I love Bill Murray.
It's kind of one of those movies that's at some point during the Christmas season, if I don't specifically sit down to watch it, I will come across it somehow. Like you said, it's streaming on AMC right now. I think it's kind of one that's in regular rotation at Christmas time on that channel. So, as you mentioned in your write-up, Bill Murray, he was kind of on hiatus for a while. After Ghostbusters, which was wildly successful,
he did Razor's Edge.
Razor's Edge, which we talked about this when we talked about Ghostbusters earlier this year. He had this crazy success with Ghostbusters, but his passion project that he wanted to make and, signed on to do Ghostbusters to make this film, Razor's Edge, completely bombed at the box office, did not do well with critics, and I think between the success of Ghostbusters and the real disappointment with the Razor's Edge, he kind of just wanted a break and went on hiatus, and this was the first movie he made that he starred in since Ghostbusters. And that's a 4-year gap, over a 4-year gap, because Ghostbusters came out in the summer and this didn't come out until November at Thanksgiving time. And he